Here's a quote from game designer Jeff Vogel. "Gamers don't generally care about your game's story. They want the adrenaline spikes of shooty bang bang or the sweet dopamine hits from filling up status bars. If you are in the mood for good storytelling, you can watch a movie, or a TV show, or read a book. Each of these is 1,000 miles beyond the best video game in terms of storytelling." Believe it or not, I'm not quoting him just to tell you how much I disagree, or to point out that he called the end of Spec Ops: The Line a cop-out trick. How dare you? But I think his point comes from a legitimate place. I mean, can you name a character from Hitman other than the Hitman? I can't think of any names, I just like throwing objects at people. What? Tree. Resist buff! But let's try that same question again, but a little bit differently.
Can you name one character from the top grossing film of all time, Avatar?
On one fine evening but a handful of summers ago, I was sat at home happily enjoying some Ace Combat 7. The PC port hadn't come out yet or even been announced, so I was using the PlayStation Remote Play app thing to play on my PC while talking on Discord. Someone in chat suggested a few rounds of Ultimate Chicken Horse, so I suspended my Ace Combat, tabbed out, and got to sheepin'. But in the middle of a game I get an email from PlayStation. "Thank you for your pre-order." What? As it turns out, my PS4 controller was sending inputs both to Ultimate Chicken Horse and the PS4 app at the same time. So while I was furiously sheeping my way through levels, I was also just pushing random buttons on my PS4 dashboard, which happened to select one of the game advertisements on the homepage and then pre-order said game. I wish I was making this up. Do you want to know what game I accidentally pre-ordered? The Last of Us Part 2. Hey, down. Easy. Let me finish my story. For a few moments I contemplated going through the hassle of contacting support to cancel the pre-order. I heard pretty good things about the first game. Maybe I could just watch a recap video or the cutscenes or something, but it's not really my kind of game. I never really liked Uncharted, and my impression of The Last of Us is that the gameplay is basically Uncharted, but with slightly different environments. So I contacted support, canceled my pre-order, and that's the end of the story. Nothing else of note happened after that. Game came out. Nobody had anything in particular to say about The Last of Us Part 2 in one way or another. Certainly nothing to say about the story. Definitely no discussion to be found there. This is not an invitation to debate about The Last of Us Part 2 in the comments, by the way. If I catch you acting up down there, I will turn this YouTube channel around and we will go home. Now behave and eat your Happy Meal. My point is that The Last of Us as a series is a clear example of the fact that sometimes gamers actually do care about the story in their video games. I mean, ask anyone what their favorite part of either game was, and they'll probably tell you about a story beat or a bit of dialogue rather than like a moment in the actual gameplay. And that's part of the reason that Part 2 was such a controversial game. They made some, shall we say, bold decisions with where they took their characters, and it got people feeling some type of way. If nothing else, the never-ending discussion threads are a good example of the distinction between having an opinion on a game and having a gamer opinion. Alright, now I'm gonna stop talking about The Last of Us before I need a full hazmat suit to open my own comments. So, we've established that gamers do care about their story sometimes, but why only sometimes? And why are there so many games with mediocre stories? Well, you see, billions of years ago, the Earth was a molten mass. This might shock some of you, but video games are games. Which is to say they aren't movies or books. They're rule sets that you abide by. Points, scoring systems, dice rolls, physics, geometry, stuff like that. Think Space War had a story? It was made by MIT students. They wouldn't know a good story if you slapped them with Saint-Genet, or Saint Joan for that matter. Narrative is just something that we decided can somehow fit within or around the format of the game. Cutscenes are a pretty natural means to that end, and they're pretty versatile too. You can have them tell the full-on narrative, scene for scene, or you can just show people the important parts, like, hey, look at this big scary thing you're about to fight. You are now fighting it. Take Portal 2, for example. A certified hood classic, won multiple awards for its dialogue and narrative, probably my favorite Valve game other than the one that I hate. And just about all the story in that game is crammed into about 4 or 5 scripted sequences combined with the dialogue that you listen to between test chambers, which is hilarious, by the way. It's a very welcome reprieve from quietly trying to figure out a puzzle by yourself for 10 minutes.
Excellent. You're a predator, and these tests are your prey. Speaking of which, I was researching sharks for an upcoming test. Do you know who else murders people who are only trying to help them? Did you guess sharks? Because that's wrong. The correct answer is nobody. Nobody but you is that pointlessly cruel.
So when I play and finish Portal 2, I think to myself, man, that was fun. This is a really good game, and I can't really ask for anything more than that from a game. It's really hard to make a game that's as good as Portal 2. But Portal 2 is a game that has good writing, but an okay narrative. It might be the ultimate example of what people think about when they say, oh yeah, it has a good story for a video game. There's a great GDC talk from a couple of the writers from Portal 2, and through it they describe the writing process as being pretty similar to how they design the gameplay. Come up with an idea, test it with players, rewrite it, retest it, so on and so forth. From the top down, it doesn't seem like a bad approach, but I think it might be why the script leans more towards short, instantly gratifying dialogue rather than longer, more consistent themes. It certainly has its moments. The white gel made of crushed moon rocks are what caused Cave Johnson's death, and at the end of the game, Wheatley gets yeeted into space via a portal to the moon. That's pretty clever stuff. I like the idea of Cave and Wheatley as somewhat analogous characters in charge of aperture science, but the game doesn't really go anywhere with it. There's the Greek mythology stuff, but if you're someone who didn't know that GLaDOS' character arc is pretty similar to Prometheus's, finding out about that is not going to reshape your entire perspective of the game. To begin with, Portal 2 wasn't written as an interpretation of the story of Prometheus, it's just something they noticed was similar as they were writing, so they included a few Easter eggs. It's part of that spur-of-the-moment creativity that works great in short bursts, but can't really substitute for that juicy, slow-cooked, right-off-the-bone narrative. The ending doesn't really feel like a conclusion so much as where the game just stopped. Not that there was any loose ends in the plot, everything is actually wrapped up in a neat little bow. Chell finally touches grass, GLaDOS is back in the chair, Wheatley's in space, hey look, the companion cube is back. Credits roll, GLaDOS sings about how she hopes she'll be happier without Chell or Caroline's memories, and that's it. Which is kind of a shame, because I think there's plenty of places it could have gone. Wheatley and Cave are both charismatic dudes who didn't really have any scientific expertise. Caroline was almost kind of forced to take over Aperture by Cave Johnson, so did GLaDOS delete Caroline's memories simply because Wheatley reminded her of Cave? Or is it because digging up Caroline's memories made her empathize with Chell, someone who was also forced into Aperture Science? I mean, empathy would impede GLaDOS' instinct to test. I'm really grasping at straws here. Maybe they could have framed the ending as GLaDOS implicitly saving Chell and deleting Caroline as a way of fully accepting Aperture Science as her own kind of prison. Picture like a bittersweet version of the same ending where Chell looks back at the door and just for a moment you wonder if somehow, some way, Caroline could have been free. And then she sends you the companion cube. Wouldn't that be nice? I think that would be nice, but then again I played Dead Island, so clearly I can't be trusted. It's hard writing a good plot that doesn't outstay its welcome. It's even harder to write a good plot that doesn't outstay its welcome that also has motifs and themes that resonate strongly with people, and trying to squeeze all of that around a fun game, well that's actually been done before, and you can do it again. You just need a few simple tricks. Games journalists hate him. This ugly son of a bitch. What is it about games like New Vegas that bring us back so many years later? It's not the 3 loading screens on the strip, and it's definitely not the wall textures in Doc Mitchell's house, I'll tell you that. God damn. I think the best open worlds are rewarding just to exist in. Not rewarding in the dopamine hit, demon fist and twist kind of way, but rewarding in a slower sense. The more time you spend in the world, the more familiar you become with its inhabitants and what moves them forward, the more pieces seem to fit together. New Vegas' themes are so pervasive and comprehensive that they function like a Katamari ball, slowly accruing mass, until eventually it rolls your very brain up into it. Filling the role of the courier not only lets you play out the story of your character and the Mojave at large, but it also exposes you to some real big thinker box questions. What or who is best for the wasteland, and how does the courier fit into that equation? The best outcome for Novak probably won't be the best outcome for Jacobstown, so how do you make decisions with that in mind? Does the way forward for New Vegas lie in a societal model from the past, or is there another, better way? Questions like those then lead you into that real shit, those deep personal questions, the philosophical quandaries, the Amazon searches for programming socks. Mind you, New Vegas achieves all of this despite, or maybe because, you play as the most blank of blank slate characters. The Courier is so ambiguous that lead writer John Gonzalez literally describes them as a player-shaped hole, a term that I can only assume was borrowed from NWA. You know how all those Fallout trailers are like, hey, isn't being in the post-apocalypse fun? Shoot those bad guys, listen to the 50s bops. What I love about New Vegas' writing is that it takes that feeling and it grounds it so hard in reality that it has to be dug up by a Securitron. But it's not fetishized edginess either. So many writers get caught in the trap of, oh, look at how hardcore the apocalypse is. Everyone you meet is either tragically dying or a drug-addicted maniac that you gotta kill. No, the world's already ended, and now being around just kinda sucks. Of course, people do starve, people do get addicted to drugs and generally do barbaric things to each other, but they also farm and practice medicine and try to get along sometimes. You know, not everything is so nasty, brutish, and short. Did you hear that? That's a philosopher's quote. That means it's from a really old book, and I'm extra smart for referencing it. Look at me, I write scripts. I have a Patreon. Wait, is that real? The weight of all this realism is the perfect counterbalance to hold up the fun stuff. Old World Blues is my favorite DLC, but imagine if the entire game was written with that humorous tone. It'd be like an expanding balloon of witty punchlines and wacky dialogue with no string to keep it on Earth. A game so devoid of real conversation that even the most unpredictable jokes land flat on their face. Anyway, on a completely unrelated note, did you know that there's a Borderlands movie coming out this year? Dear video game publishers, please consider giving your movie adaptation rights to a company that actually gives a fuck about making a good movie. Yes, you can make some money by just selling the rights to the highest bidder, but when the dust settles and you have 100 minutes of...
So what? Are we like Guardians of the Galaxy now?
This trailer has over 13 million views. For many people, that may have been their first and only impression of Monster Hunter as a franchise. But don't you worry, Capcom fans. Mega Man's next. Look at this list of top video game films. Detective Pikachu, Sonic the Hedgehog, Mortal Kombat, are these the games that you associate with strong writing? Okay, I haven't actually played Detective Pikachu, it might be a masterpiece, but these are just the very few films, I think, where the studio actually gave a half-decent attempt at bringing the game to the movie. Like, look at Tomb Raider. How hard could it be to take Tomb Raider, part survivalist, part Indiana Jones, and make an entertaining action movie? Pretty hard, as it turns out. It's taken them a few tries. Man, wouldn't it be funny if the upcoming Indiana Jones game turns out to be better than the Tomb Raider films? It could be like a nice change of pace for machine games, since Wolfenstein was really losing its steam. What's that? Do you hear? By God, that's Todd Howard's music! Todd Howard, he's coming in with the steel chair! The bottom line is that 9 times out of 10, these opportunities are being handed to studios and directors who only see them as business opportunities, which, ironically, is what makes them such bad business moves in the first place. But hey, I mean, I heard good things about the Witcher TV series, and now a Disco Elysium series might be in pre-production. And this is a lot less funny when it's something that you actually care about. So you might have just read the word superhot and thought, wait, those games have a story? Yes, they do. And I think Mind Control Delete in particular is a good example of a type of storytelling that only video games can really accomplish. It's not exceptionally written, and there aren't really many good quotables aside from, you know, super. But I think the way this game stages its story is a really unique thing. It's somehow kinda understated for a game that flashes giant words in your face every few minutes. The entire narrative of the game orbits around the relationship between player and game. In that respect, it's not that unique from other games. The bridge between the character you play and you is something that many games travel, but there's a surprising amount of versatility in how exactly it can be used. On the basic side of things, just assuming control of a character for any length of time will quite literally put you in their shoes. Then you have player characters which are more malleable, those that relay their conflicts back to the player, those that are named Stanley. In Mind Control Delete, you play as Avarice, someone who, as the name suggests, is endlessly infatuated with superhot and constantly demands more of the game. So the plotline simply follows you playing through layers of superhot levels, unlocking new abilities, challenge modes, freeing yourself from your flesh prison, just about everything you'd expect. Along the way, you meet a few recurring characters who function like mini-bosses, and you can unlock log entries that explain how they were pulled into the system and how the system eventually took control of them. Fun fact, one of these bosses, Addict, is the player that you play as in the original superhot, so that's cool. Anyway, you work your way to the final layer, and the system takes literally everything from you. Punching, throwing, looking, moving, your life, the plot. Just about everything is gone until you make one last-ditch effort and finally overcome it. It's a pretty simple story. The ending is kinda neat because despite the fact that you beat the system, quote-unquote, the result Avarice is fighting for is the privilege to stay a part of it, which effectively makes them no different from Addict or the other mini-bosses who got roped in. And it also leaves the possibility that this was all part of the system's plan in the first place, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, that's about it. Oh, I forgot to mention, until this progress bar is done, you can't play the game anymore. That's right, it's real Doki Doki Literature Club hours. 8 hours, in fact. That's how long it took for this bar to finish when the game released, and you had to leave it open the whole time. Naturally, people complained about it and it was cut down to 2 hours, but honestly, with how stripped back the story's presentation is, doubling down at the very end like this might be one of the ballsier moves I've seen in any game's ending. Like, at least you can reinstall Doki Doki at your leisure, and that game's entire shtick is basically the game coming apart. This is extreme, but it makes sense. Mind Control Delete is a constant test of how far Avarice, and by extension you, are willing to go to get more. If you're willing to go as far as Avarice, you'll sacrifice everything and you will wait to play again. And that's the kind of narrative play that makes video games special. Everybody knows that they're unique because they're interactive, but not everybody sees what you can do with that engagement. It's really a treasure trove of fascinating ideas that I think a lot of writers have a difficult time plundering, not necessarily because they're not capable, but because it's really risky just to try. As run-of-the-mill as gameplay cutscene can be, it's a very safe bet. And when you have a company of hundreds or thousands even of people relying on your game to sell so they can keep their lights on, I mean, who can really blame you for playing things safe? Especially given how young video games as an art form are. I mean, they've only been in widespread circulation for maybe 50 years? That's not even half the age of film. And books? Go ahead, name something older than books. Go on. Okay, so here's possibly the coldest take on planet Earth. Gameplay and story should serve each other. Wow, revolutionary concept. Great job, Meat Man. That's why they pay you the big bucks. Yes, it is very obvious, but so many games treat this as a one-way street where the story is used to reinforce or justify the gameplay, but not the other way around. There are a few games that do it, and I know one in particular that does it very, very well. Okay, look, I know I've already talked about Disco Elysium for hours at this point, but my other choices for this section were either going to be the Stanley Parable or Death Stranding. There's no option here that hasn't already been talked to death, so I may as well pick the one I like talking about the most. For those who do not know, in Disco Elysium you play as an amnesiac, alcoholic detective, constantly on the verge of a mental or physical breakdown. The gameplay, simply put, is trying to figure stuff out. The murder mystery, your identity, maybe the world to some degree. Obviously, with the game being so heavy in the writing department, it gives lots of sand in the sandbox to play with, but one of the many things that impresses me about Disco Elysium is the way the underlying structure, the very rules that you play the game by, fit into and reinforce the narrative. When you're navigating a conversation, the skills and thoughts you choose are what shape the mindset of the detective, and that has a huge effect on how the events of the story are framed. Not necessarily how they play out, but how they're framed, and that's a very important distinction. When people talk about RPGs, what's the one thing they always want? Okay, the one thing other than steamy alien sex. People want choices that matter, right? But that's a very easy sauce to get lost in as a writer, let alone the material and technical limitations of game development that hover over you. And so player agency becomes kind of a tug of war in games where you have choices. If you've played a game like Mass Effect more than once, it becomes very obvious which conversations and decisions are important, and which ones are just kind of extra flavor. I know I might be outing myself as a fake Mass Effect fan here, but I'll admit it. I don't go to Depot Sigma 23 on every playthrough. Sometimes I've got better things to do. But if I sit down to play Disco Elysium, I'm hanging out with the bums. I'm talking to the shipping container, and you best believe I'm starting a nightclub in that church. Because when you approach these things with a new set of skills or thoughts, it changes the way you experience them. Role-playing games aren't just about what happens in the story, they're also about who it happens to. I think the most important decisions that you can give players aren't just ones that decide the fate of the world or the galaxy, but ones that define the character that you play. If you cure the genophage in Mass Effect, that's not just points in your Paragon meter. Shepard becomes the person who cured the genophage. People will commend you or condemn you. You see your choice reverberate both outwards into what happens later on in the story in the universe, but also inwards. It's something that defines Shepard as a character, and having the agency to make that kind of character-defining choice as a player is great. What's incredible about Disco Elysium is that that level of agency is not just in the big decisions, it's baked into the game's systems. Everything from your thought cabinet to your selection and skills is reflected back at you through the course of the game. There may be brief moments where you think, oh man, I wish I had put more points into this skill, but for every one of those moments you get 3 others where you go, wow, I'm glad I picked that. But wait, you say. The detective in Disco Elysium has a set backstory, he even has a name. How does all that role-playing freedom stuff work with all that straight-line narrative stuff? It's true, you can't make every decision. The detective is someone that you both role-play and discover. For every choice you're given regarding how the detective acts or thinks, the game rewards you by showing you how that connects with who he is and his story. So while you're deciding what the detective has become in the present, you're simultaneously figuring out what he was in the past. It's kind of like what the Lonesome Road DLC kind of tried to do for the Courier, but replace the hazy accusations and moral grandstanding with crippling depression and slightly more crippling alcoholism. If I had to point at a single game and say, hey look, video games are capable of telling a great story of their own merit, it'd probably be Disco Elysium. I know that might seem like cheating since there's so many words, but there is a game there. It's not all just communist propaganda, despite what Able to Think on Metacritic might say. Great choice in username, by the way. So, the conclusion. Why are video game stories bad? Because Sturgeon's law says 90% of everything is bad. And that was written before the internet, so I'd say it's more realistically probably in the realm of 95%. Ultimately, I think this is the kind of issue that's really more about the perception of video games rather than problems endemic with the format. I mean, obviously there's still a lot of stuff game developers have to figure out, but that's a good thing, isn't it? More innovation, more experimentation, more steamy alien